Hobson with Rhinebeck School of Music, and in today's lesson I'm going to analyze the first solo of Sweet Home Alabama and talk about using the E minor pentatonic scale and mixing it with G major, which is called the relative minor. We're going to talk about using the blue note in the minor pentatonic scale, and we're also going to talk about using chromatic passing tones to kind of take your solo outside the box a little bit, to kind of play in the style of this solo, but also understand the notes that are outside of the pentatonic scale. I'm going to do a really quick overview of the concepts used in this solo, and then next sections I'm going to break them down. So, right off the bat, you have use of the G major scale mixed in with that minor pentatonic scale in E. Here too, right? That C note doesn't belong in the E pentatonic scale, but it is in the G major scale. This note here, that's your blue note. So I don't know, maybe you've practiced your scale, your E pentatonic scale, with the blue note, which is the sharp 4, the flat 5, the tritone. They call it the blue note. But I'm going to break that down too. So this is straight up pentatonic. Then this is a chromatic passing tone, which you can throw in chromaticism in your pentatonic scales. I'll show you how to do that. Blue note, back to the major scale. So the first thing you need to know is what key this song is in. And I'm going to tell you, I mean, you have a D, and you have a C, and you have a G. This is the 5, this is the 4, this is the 1 in the key of G major. If you don't know much about music theory, I suggest you brush up on your diatonic chord progressions and understanding how chords work in relationship to scales. But what I tell my students all the time is if you have 3 major chords in a song, likely that's going to be your 1, 4, 5 chord progression. So if you can find the 2 chords that are just a whole step apart, in this case C to D, then your remaining chord is usually your 1 chord. It doesn't always work out that way, but it's just kind of a quick little thing that you can maybe try to think about when you're trying to analyze a key. So because it's in G major, you can make use of your G major scale. I'm going to use this position up here, starting on the G on the 15th fret, because it's going to layer really nicely over that E minor pentatonic scale when we talk about what a relative minor is and how these 2 scales fit together. So if I start on my G here, that's the 15th fret of the top string, and then I go 12, 14, 15 on the A, 12, 14 on the D, 11, 12, 14 on the G, 12, 13, 15 on the B, 12, 14, 15 on the E. So that's the Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, Do. So you can just practice that scale, and if I just used strictly a G major scale, just so you kind of have the sound, I have the backing track for Sweet Home Alabama here, so I'm just going to show you what that sounds like as a sound. So that's just sort of, if I just played strictly in the major key, that's how it would sound with that scale. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the relative minor. So we know that the song is in G major, and we know where our G major scale is. So if you go to the 6th note of the G major scale, you get your relative minor. So here's G, A, B, C, D, and there's my E. So here's my E pentatonic scale. what most of the song is based on, is that E pentatonic scale mixing with that G major sound. So if I can weave those sounds together, then I can mix the blues sound of the pentatonic scale with like little passing tones of the major scale, and it sounds more like this. So I'm just improvising, obviously, but that is the sound that you kind of want to start mixing around, is that major scale with that E minor pentatonic scale. You could also think of it as just the G major pentatonic scale mixed with the G major scale. But either way, it's this shape, pentatonic shape, with this shape of your major scale. Next thing we're going to talk about are chromatic passing tones. So chromatic means just moving in half steps, right? From one fret to the next. So if I take this pentatonic scale in E, and I start connecting each line chromatically, like I go 12, 13, 14, 15, and then I go 12, 13, 14, 12, 13, 14, 12, 13, 14, 15, 12, 13, 14, 15, same on that, and going backwards. That's just an exercise, that's just practicing, it's not music at all. But if you kind of throw that stuff in every once in a while, it has an effect, so I'll show you. So it has a certain effect, like it's kind of taking it outside the box a little bit. And again, I'm just kind of messing around and playing around. So if you're just playing your straight up pentatonic scale, that's great. But try adding the tritone from the root, the sharp 4, flat 5, which is known as the blue note. So now what I have is 12, 15, and then on the A string I have 12, 13, 14, A sharp to B. And that occurs again on the G string, so I have 12, 14, 15, my blue note. And that has a huge presence in this solo. Right? You hear it all the time. They pull that out a lot of the time. So if you add that in, then your solo can sound more like this. So you can really start to hear how that has a huge presence in this solo. So now that I've kind of gone over every point that I kind of wanted to make about what things you can do with your, like, that are outside of the pentatonic scale a little bit, we can kind of talk about improvising over that and using all those things. So I've given you a lot of knowledge about different scales to use and different concepts to use together. But the one thing that my students always ask me is, how do I know which notes to resolve to? How do I know where to end my phrases? And the answer is the chord tones of your chords. So the reason why a pentatonic scale is so easy to use, because there's only 5 notes. There's really not a lot of room for error. There's only a few notes you could play that are really outside of the resolution, and that's why it's an easy go-to scale. The major scale has 7 notes, so you have some added color tones that aren't chord tones, that are a little bit harder to navigate. So what I recommend in the beginning is learning your arpeggios so that you learn how to navigate those chord tones of the chords. So we talked about the chords are D and C and G. So see if you can play those chords in different positions. Like this is my D shape, the same as my open D shape here, but I've moved it up to the 14th fret, an octave higher. So now I have, this is my D chord. If I move it back 2 frets, that's my C chord. If I bar the 12th fret, that's my G chord. So now I have my chord tones within that, right? I could do it in different inversions. Or, right? So now I really know where the notes of my chord are. So when you're starting a phrase, maybe you want to start at pentatonic, right? So right there, that's a B. That works really well in that G where I've ended my phrase. So you want to think when you're soloing what chords you're on and know where to resolve. So I'll just show you some examples, right? So I'm just playing the chords. I'm just practicing. Right? So now, but you can see, like, I'm kind of thinking about where I am in the chord changes when I'm soloing, and I'm if I'm over the D chord, I'm trying to use notes from the D chord. If I'm over the C chord, I'm trying to use notes from the C chord, and if I'm over the G chord, I'm trying to resolve to notes over the G chord. And that's a lot to think about at first, and eventually your ears take over on this stuff, and you just start to hear it, and you start to play it, and it becomes innate. But the things to practice in the beginning is practice your chord changes with triads over this position so that you know where your notes are that you can resolve to. And most of the time it's going to be on that G chord, because the G chord kind of hangs out there for a while. So, resolving to the B, or resolving to the G, or resolving to the D, those are all chord tones in that G chord. So that's why always going back to that note works really well. And these chords go by so quickly, the D and the C, that you don't really, a lot of the time you're not really going to hit those. In the beginning of the solo, they hit that D major. So hopefully what I've shown you is helpful in some way to help you break out of your boxes and into your own creativity and start soloing in the style of something like this.